So I'm just gonna turn around and you guys are just gonna get shown to my professor. So, hello everyone. My name is Casey Barmas, and I, like you said, have been here at Good Sam as a VU student for a couple of weeks now. We're doing it, sorry. So, my capstone project had to be over something related to nursing management. And I was lucky enough to follow your guys' nursing supervisors, and I think I met all but one of them. I did work mostly overnights and in um, the weekends. I didn't get to work during the week, unfortunately. I have a full-time job, so that made it a little difficult. But I was really lucky to get to talk to several nurses, PCTs, and just some other staff members about the burnout and turnover rates that you guys are experiencing, and just from other places that they've worked as well. So one of the first things that I wanted to learn when I was looking up burnout and turnover rates was a definition that I could understand and that made sense to me when I was thinking of problems with burnout and turnover and how to kind of address it in a larger scale. So for me, burnout is when nursing staff or just any staff have worked just so extremely hard and for such long hours and with little to no help that they've just hit a wall and they are unfortunately no longer able to keep going and at the level that they would like. Turnover is the rate at which nurses or other staff are leaving the hospital for other facilities or just leaving healthcare in general. That was something that was somewhat unexpected for me to learn how many people are just leaving healthcare altogether. So, um, some of the main causes of burnout, I wanted 3 main reasons for each. That way it was a little more simplified because everyone's going to have different reasons for each issue. So, I might work with my best friend every day and they would have a different reason for being burnt out than I would. So, one of the most important things was staff just being overworked in general because of shortages, high number of patient care, uh, getting a floor of patients who all have a high level of care that they need provided to them. Another was a lot of staff stating feeling underappreciated from maybe their coworkers, their supervisors, or just the general public. We saw a mass flood of love for healthcare workers during COVID, and then it just stopped. So getting all of that was wonderful and it was well deserved, but then it was just completely kind of cut off for most people. Another was that a lot of staff feel they don't get the supports that they need. So in some of the research I did, staff would state that they had reached out to their managers or even upper management and said, hey, I'm running on fumes. I'm running on my last leg here. I need someone to help me. And they just wouldn't get it. And so then they would just continue to go on and they would be burnt out. It was really unfortunate exactly how bad some of it could be. For turnover, one of the main causes was lack of growth of opportunity. So that was really interesting for me to see how many people were frustrated by the facilities they worked in because of things like not being able to go into a specialty or get additional certifications or things like that. Part of it was the high rates of burnout. So burnout and turnover, I'll discuss this a little bit more. They do go hand in hand. But people had just gotten so burnt out from the job that they lost the sparkle and the drive for healthcare and they looked for something different. And then staff, a lot of them were looking just for better pay. And I feel like in this day and age, I think for my generation, the statistic is we switch jobs every 2 to 3 years to get pay increases. And it used to be that you could start at a company at, a freshly graduate high school student and work up until your retirement, and you'd have a lovely pension and retirement benefits. And those are just things that we're not seeing as frequently anymore. So people switch jobs every 2 to 3 years to get a higher salary, better benefits, and make the future for themselves that they really want. So I do have a quote on here. It's some statistics. So for 20 years, which I'm 25, so the majority of my lifetime, nursing enrollment for bachelor's programs is what this is looking at, had been on the rise. So there's a graph, and there's one for worldwide and one for the US specifically. And it just was a steady increase for 20 years. And in 2021, there was a drop. And it was only 1.4%. But when we already have people who are in healthcare and are leaving, and people who are in healthcare and thinking about leaving, that 1.4% is extremely large, because that's people who just aren't even bothering coming into the field at all. So, like I said, burnout and turnover do go hand in hand. One of the first things that the research showed was that it's easy to understand what your specific facility needs when you actually talk to the people who are working it day in and day out. So a lot of facilities that struggle to fix their burnout or turnover rates is because they're bringing in these expensive professionals from outside who might not have even ever worked in the healthcare setting. And they have wonderful ideas, but it's not what the people actually want. Because a lot of the times, what the staff really want to get that appreciation, to feel well respected, is kind of something small, as, extra time off, um, a bonus here and there because, hey, we had, a lot of high numbers and you guys showed up. And sometimes, you get the silly things of sending someone motivational quotes or things, and they're lovely to get, but that's not enough for what staff are experiencing. Um, so the numbers have started to come down pre-COVID for burnout and turnover. It probably doesn't always seem like it when you talk with people who are actually in healthcare, because I know personally, as I was speaking with several of your colleagues, there are high numbers of folks who are just ready to leave Good Sam or healthcare in general. I believe it was one floor entirely. I was here on I think it was a Saturday night, and every single person I spoke to on that floor was planning to leave when their contract was up, except for one person. And it was at least 5 individuals. So I was shocked by that because they just had no incentive to stay. And they were just really frustrated and felt that they needed something more. So they were going to go look at other opportunities. COVID also, I think for everyone, it changed the way you look at everything. For me, I changed what I wanted to do in my profession because I thought about going in to be a history professor, and then I was a little unsure about that because the world shut down, and what good is a history professor when nobody's really doing classes? So it did make people reevaluate their life and what they wanted for themselves and their families. Um, so one way to improve burnout and turnover rates is when a facility just looks at the larger picture. So when they're looking at burnout and turnover together and as a whole facility, what can they do to help individual floors, individual staff, things like that? That's where you see the numbers improving. So I believe it was in Alaska, because it was somewhere a little odd. The facility ended up alternating. It was a very small hospital facility. It was kind of like a clinic more. They ended up alternating their staff for hunting season, so people had like a good chunk of time off to go hunting because that's what their staff wanted. They didn't want to have to use up their vacation time to go and do that, but pretty much everybody there had someone involved that wanted to go out for deer season or whatever it was. And so their facility just worked together to plan the schedule of these folks would have this, set amount of time off, and then they would flip flop it. So the other set had time off to do this activity that everybody wanted to do, and then they weren't having to use up, their precious PTO time because it was something everybody wanted to do. They just made it work. And it also helped just to have, an overall happier and more productive staff, because then they were able to save that PTO time for when they really were sick, or a kiddo was sick, or just needed a day off. So some of the tips that I found for coping with burnout were offering classes for staff to learn healthy coping mechanisms and how to handle stressful times. Because it's really shocking when you look at the numbers, how many people don't understand how to have a healthy coping mechanism, how to deal with their stress in a non-harmful way. And a lot of these classes now can be offered online, can be offered, in person in a room like this with, a small group of people at a time. And it just allows them to have some extra resources if they should choose to take it. Another was to make sure that management was checking in on staff and actually speaking to them. So it's different if a manager comes up and is like, everybody good? Good? Okay, and leaves, versus a manager who actually stops, talks to their staff and says, what do you need? I experienced several times the nursing supervisors that I was shadowing just hear, a light go off or a pump go off, and they were in the middle of a conversation, checking on the floor, said, "Oh, I'll grab that," and went and got it. Or somebody needing a glass of water or a drink, and they went and got it. Taking food trays that were sitting out back to the cart to go down to dietary. They didn't have to do those things, but they understood that their staff is already overworked. They're already struggling. It's something that's going to take them just a couple of seconds to do, and it takes that off of them. So it was wonderful for me to see it, because these are things I've been learning, to do the step up and take action kind of stuff. But to see it in play with people who actually care about what they do and the people they work with was wonderful. Another coping mechanism was making sure that staffing ratios are as safe and workable as possible as often as possible. So obviously, with turnover being so high and there just being staffing shortages in general, it's really difficult to get those numbers where they would ideally be. But a lot of people, you'll see complaints across the board in almost every facility where there's always one floor that has perfect staffing. Like, they're never short people. And then you'll have, 2 or 3 other floors where they're always getting people pulled and people are getting asked to go to other places. So it was interesting to see how many facilities have complaints of that, where it's like you have one place that's perfect all the time, and then but we're always struggling on this floor, and then they get in trouble because their call times are longer, or people aren't as quick to respond to stuff because there's just not as much help there. So some tips for coping with turnover were for the facility to be competitive in all areas. So obviously pay is what I think majority of people look at today with, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to enjoy my life? But people also want to see their PTO time. Do they have good vacation time? Are you actually able to take it? Because staff talks to one another, and in a community like ours, and you have people traveling from Evansville, Terre Haute, Princeton, Vincennes, like they all fluctuate and they're all willing to travel. So it's very interesting to have those conversations with folks who have worked in, Evansville or Princeton or Terre Haute, and see how the difference is between facilities and what they pay, what their PTO is, kind of their just benefits in general. Because some places, might have really great pay, but you can never get any time off. And that might be a deciding factor for someone. And this is one that I actually got from folks here at Good Sam, was incentives for staying with the company. So a lot of people talked about sign-on bonuses and that they're wonderful and great, but there were no real bonuses for people for longevity of service. So you have people who have been here for a decade or more, and they just kind of get a thumbs up. And I mean, that's no real reason to stay when maybe a hospital, in Evansville is offering a $10,000 sign-on bonus. I mean, that's a little bit more of an incentive to go there. And so those bonuses for longevity of service are important to a lot of people, or even people who requested extra PTO time. So when they hit those kind of milestone 5, 10, 15 years of service, getting a couple extra days of PTO for that year, or an extra bonus, extra raise with what they would normally have gotten. Another incentive was improving skills or getting new certifications. So I was seeing this in some larger facilities when I was researching the kind of benefits that they offer. There's a lot of facilities that are moving towards offering certifications and specialties for their staff so they can train in those fields and then, take their testing, get their certifications and things. And a lot of people really like those because then you look a lot more impressive on your resume when you have those additional skills behind you. Another was to work with staff so that they're in an area that interests them. So for me, when I was speaking with folks here, it seemed like the majority of folks were working in an area that they enjoyed. So if someone was on ICU, they enjoyed being on ICU. If someone was on med surge, they enjoyed being on med surge, and they kind of had the opportunity to move to a different floor if they had wanted to. In some facilities, people just kind of get plopped somewhere, and it's an area they have no interest in. Maybe they don't want to work with babies or children, and that's where they're stuck most of the time. And they prefer working, with the ICU folks, and they never get to go to the ICU. And so I did use Reddit as a bit of a resource for myself. Unfortunately, it's not a scholarly resource, so it didn't get brought in a whole lot, but I used it just to get a feel for how nurses and nursing staff in general were feeling about their working conditions and what they were doing day to day. And it was really great to get those personal perspectives from people because it is mostly anonymous. So they're very much more open to speaking their minds instead of kind of being filtered in what they're saying. And so a lot of folks just were very much interested in being in the area that they liked being in, and it made them more driven to do their work. So when I spoke to the staff here, some of the staff requests that I was given were scrub allowances. So either in, just a yearly check, or Good Sam buying, a set or two of scrubs for folks. And that's actually not a horrible idea for Good Sam because then you can get your logo embroidered on it. And I saw a nurse the other day at Marshall's. We were both shopping at the end of the day, and if she had her Good Sam stuff, I don't know where she worked, but that would have just been a little free marketing because I knew she was at least healthcare staff. She had her scrubs on. It's usually only healthcare that wears scrubs. But another one was meal options for overnight staff. So overnight staff get here so late that everything is closed. So they're either bringing their food in from home or ordering it from DoorDash delivery services. And a lot of them get tired of it or have difficulty with getting them here. So I know a couple people have talked about how sometimes people get confused on where they need to go at night too. The delivery drivers do. So their food kind of gets taken halfway around the hospital before it gets to who they need to. So one thought was that perhaps the staff could order the day before their shift from the cafeteria and then have it charged like they normally do with the badge scan. Or even if Good Sam had wanted to formulate an app of some kind, and that could work for all staff. So that way they weren't taking time out of their break. They could order it on their phone, go down, pick it up, and leave. And that would save them some break time versus standing down there waiting in lines. It's usually not too bad of a line down there, but it does take up time and energy even just standing there when maybe all you want to do is sit down for a minute. More student loan help was brought up a couple of times. So maybe looking into some of the grants that are coming out now for people who work in healthcare and making sure that staff is getting that information and if they're still in school, and then for staff that have gone or have finished school, making sure that they're getting all the information on student loan forgiveness and stuff, because it is kind of changing day to day. I know recently it was kind of, everyone was hoping we were going to get some student loan forgiveness, and it didn't happen, unfortunately. So again, the bonus for time spent at Good Sam was a big point for a lot of the folks who have been here for several years, because folks who have been here for just a handful of years, they don't have that loyalty yet. But the folks who have been here for 5-10 years, they have that loyalty, but they just don't get rewarded for it. And then one that I was requested to bring up was childcare subsidies. So a lot of the folks around here have fairly young kids, which I was interested to learn, because for whatever reason it didn't click in my brain how many folks working in Good Sam would have kids young enough that still need daycare. And it's quite a large number. And so obviously it isn't something that would affect everyone. If you don't have kids, you might not need that subsidy. But just a little bit of help for folks who are having to pay for daycare was said to would have been appreciated. So some steps to improve burnout and turnover. For burnout, making sure that staff is using time off when they're able to. So you'll have some staff that they never want their time off, they never use it, they don't care, they don't want it. But it's always good to try and get them to take a day or two off when there's that flexibility to do so. So that way they just don't get burnt out, because they might not think that they're getting overworked and overly tired, but they slowly and surely are. And then another was to support new graduates. So something we did see, and I did speak with the nursing supervisors a few times, was folks not understanding that someone might be off of orientation, but they're still, a brand new nurse. And so they're still a little hesitant on stuff and a little unsure on things. So they still do need that support system behind them. And it seems like there's a pretty good mentor program in place. But occasionally they kind of get thrown to the wolves if there's short staff happening. So just making sure that they're being supported and not given too full of a load too quickly. Another was to make sure that management knows what their staff are facing. So this was something that I saw in larger hospital settings talked about. You have like upper management who have never worked in healthcare or have been out of practicing healthcare for 20, 30 years, and they've forgotten what it feels like to be on the floor doing stuff with a patient. And when you forget that feeling of intensity of being there and saving someone's life, or just helping them to the restroom, it kind of you lose touch with what people are experiencing and what they're dealing with. And so that was a big one for me when I was researching everything, was just making sure that management understands what their staff are dealing with. Because when you look at a piece of paper with staff ratios and everything, it's one thing, but when you understand the context behind it of, maybe you have 2 or 3 people who need sitters, and you have some fall risks, and you have a new nurse, it starts to really add up quickly of exactly what, this small group of people is trying to overcome. So for turnover, offering flexible schedules was a big one that nurses now want. So a lot of places are moving towards that 12-hour shift for continuity of care. And it also helps staff, you only have to work 3 days versus 4 or 5 days a week. And a lot of people, it can be tiring is what I drew from the 12-hour shifts, but a lot of people really do like it because they're done with their work week a lot faster. To be competitive with others in the area. So for somewhere like Good Sam, you have to be competitive with Evansville, Princeton, Terre Haute, and even Indy, because some people were willing to travel to Indy. They had friends or family to stay with, or they were even willing to make that trip every, for 3 days out of the week. That would be a little bit much for me, but they were willing to do it. And then offering training to give nurses new qualifications, improve their skills. This is something I've touched on, but it was a big one that staff really liked in other facilities, was just that opportunity to grow their skills and improve their resume. and it just overall kept them engaged in what they were doing as well. So some things that were important for both were making sure that there was adequate staffing. Obviously, that can be really difficult when there's shortages happening already, but whenever able, just making sure that the staffing is as equal as possible was really important to a lot of people. Looking at flexible benefits that people are looking for today. So, like with the childcare, some people might never want children, so they're never going to need that childcare benefit. But maybe there's another benefit, like a gym membership or wellness center, that could be offered to folks who maybe don't want or need childcare. So, offering flexible stuff so that way they can pick and choose a little bit what their benefits are. And then being willing to individualize to staff's personal needs. So some staff may never really care how much PTO time they get. They take 1 week vacation a year. That's it. So their vacation time is fine. Other staff, maybe have 2 or 3 kids and they're using up all their PTO because they've got sick kiddos. So it was really, a lot of people are moving towards an individualized personal workplace. So it's not just rubber stamping everybody with the same benefits and the same expectations, because everyone works a little bit differently and needs a little bit different from their management and their facility. So, in summary, burnout and turnover go hand in hand. Numbers show that when burnout is on the rise, turnover starts to go up as well. And then as turnover rises, more staff are likely to experience burnout. When steps are put in place by a company to help their employees, both can be managed and lowered. So it really is important that facilities look at both burnout and turnover together and improve them together. So if you're only working on improving your turnover, your burnout might still be at that same high level, and it's just not going to ever matter what you do to fix your turnover, and then vice versa. So that is the end. So I'm just going to turn the camera around again, that there's still people here. And then if anybody has any questions, that was kind of my last little bit. So I'm happy to answer questions about things I spoke to the staff about or experienced while I was here, or just anything about my research that I came across as well. And if you don't, that's fine. I just appreciate you guys showing up and being here to listen to my little presentation today.
Yeah.